When I first joined Aerospace about 13 years ago, I said, what's the volume of this part then? And they went 300. And I said, is that a day? Is it a week? No, that's a year. And I was like, whoa, that was quite a shock, really.
Hi, welcome to the Manufacturers Make Strides podcast. Today, I've got a conversation with Mark Cook, who's Program Manager at Triumph Actuation Systems. He has a career that spans automotive, oil and gas, and now the high-spec aerospace engineering. He made a shift just after university from pure science into applied manufacturing, and why seeing how those ideas could be turned into real products just changed everything for Mark. Within making that career change, he experienced the truth about aerospace that being slow by necessity and being rigorous by design lead to a real culture change and shift, and we explore some of those areas. Mark's calm, relationship-driven approach to program management on why most delays often come from misalignment, not necessarily engineering faults. And then he finally left us with his biggest lesson for teams: to be open, be honest, and pick up the phone before problems start to snowball. So we've got lots of lessons and insights from Mark's career here. Let's jump straight into the conversation now with Mark Cook. Hey Mark, great to have you on the podcast. How's things going today?
Oh, good, thank you.
Where are you joining from today?
So dialing in from work. I work for Triumph Aerospace over on D-side Industrial Park. So I'm just in one of the meeting rooms there, basically.
So yeah, kind of UK just outside on the border of England and Wales, right on that border, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. On that big industrial park.
So we'll get to your journey and your story eventually, but I like to sometimes just jump in with a picture from now kind of question. When you say, or you picture aerospace manufacturing production working at its best, what does that look like to you?
First of all, having a robust design team, a design that can be manufactured efficiently and to cost, but also then having a good supply chain in place as well, so that you're servicing your customers in an efficient and timely way, basically. So a lot like many industries, but I think aerospace compared to, say, automotive is a lot more regulated, a lot more safety factors, a lot more hurdles to jump. But end of the day, people flying on the aircraft should feel safe and be safe.
Okay, brilliant. Well, there's a lot of moving parts in that, and that's part of what you're very much involved in today. But before we get to that, I'd just like to go back to your journey. So what did you study at university, and what was your experience in university like?
Yeah, I've done undergrad and postgrad. So sciences was my strength. So did a chemistry and physics degree in Nottingham. Enjoyed that, but still didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I did a master's in the chemistry-based subject and then enjoyed some of the research. So then I got offered the chance to do a PhD. So stayed on and did that. So, but what I wanted to do was something that was more applied. So we worked with what was ICI chemicals back then. So it's an industrially sponsored PhD. So actually the product, you could see going on to be sort of a usable product in the marketplace at the end of the project.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like my time at university was similar. I kind of drifted into an engineering degree because I was good at maths and science, but I didn't really have a clue. I think some people early on have a really clear path of what they want to do. Others, even into their early 20s, it can be quite difficult, can't it, to figure out. So did that give you your first taste into the kind of manufacturing industry then? And did you like that? What did you like about that?
So my first job was in a UK R&D centre. So it was going still down the sort of research route, but there was also some more applied short-term projects. And then I quite liked, again, getting the link with the business units. We'd visit the sites, see the manufacturing today's stuff, and then obviously work on the projects for the future. So I quite liked the exposure to the manufacturing side of things being made. And inherently, I'm more of a product-based person than a software-based person. So my experience with software and working with yourselves has come sort of later on in my career.
So was there a moment kind of early in your career then where you realised that the more applied and the industry route is more for you than academia.
Certainly doing my PhD, seeing some of the academics, I thought I don't want to just be a pure academic. And some of the projects there were just chasing grants, and some of them were not really that applied. So I wanted to get more on the, turn things into real projects and products, basically. I did work with a team on my first company. We got a few patent applications in. One product went into production, so it's quite nice to see something that we'd actually had from a concept and turn into a product. Was quite nice. And then working with some of the sales guys, supporting them on their sales visit to customers, you then get to see the sharp end where they're talking about costs, price reductions, and what's in it for the customer, basically. So it can be quite brutal at that cold front, but also it's quite nice to see where your products are going. So it was that sort of enticed me to go down sort of the sort of semi-commercial route, as I would call it.
Yeah, you found that a bit more, kind of engaging than the theoretical kind of grant-driven stuff. Yeah, we've had a similar path actually. Yeah, I remember because I was really interested in getting into manufacturing because I thought it was great to work on something and you see something physical being generated at the end of the day. I also remember in the first company I was working with, going out with visits with some of the sales guys who were a bit on the crazy driving and reckless driving side. So it was always a bit, always a bit of an adrenaline fueled experience. But really good going out, being in those sales situations because, you can sometimes get focused on the technical details of something, but at the end of the day, there's got to be a business case and someone's got to make a sale, haven't they? So where did Aerospace come into the picture?
Worked in automotive tier 1 for some time. I'd also worked in oil and gas for a short time, had some electrical product experience with Honeywell, quite a big company. But just locally where I live, within sort of the commuter belt, opportunity came up with a aerospace company, worked in optics. And it was going back to, I'd probably, with my automotive products, they were probably more simple, whereas the aerospace optics was quite high end. So you sort of deposit in coatings at sort of a couple of particle sizes, and the designs also of the optics themselves were quite high spec, so low volume, high spec. But it really intrigued me again to sort of get back to sort of physics days and something different. So I ended up being there for 10 years in the end. So we did some great products. The company's still one of the sort of pioneers and forefronts in that technology. And that kept me interested for 10 years, really. And that's where I got onto the software side because we had an in-house development team who developed software. And we did a lot of test benches for customers where we'd have to obviously get the optics in place, do the measurements, but also the software was bespoke written by our teams. So again, that got me interest into the software.
So you're program manager now. So what does your day-to-day now look like?
My pure job would be working with a team on a design and development program for a customer. So we could be developing so for Triumph, most of their products are hydraulic based, and we do some electrical based actuation, things that make things move, basically. So it'd be working with the design team on something new, but also we've worked on cost reductions, making things a bit cheaper. So something was designed 5-10 years ago, can it be cost engineered? No program goes in perfect. You've always got issues, latent defects, again, taking cost out. So working with the teams on that. And just general day-to-day support, really. When other departments need someone to do some project management for them, could be short term, could be a month, could be 3 months, and I might offer my help there, just overseeing and giving things a bit more structure and rigour. But what's quite nice, Martin, is you work with a lot of different functions, so you get exposure to a lot of different people and different teams, both in the UK and also Triumph's a big company, so can be working with a team in Asia, in the States, so quite diverse.
Yeah, so really very, I guess, never a dull day, always something going on. Are there any moments kind of early in your career that would you say still shape the way you do things now?
I would say if I was to do things differently, if I was to speak to someone selecting their GCSEs or A-levels nowadays, I'd say don't feel that you have to do certain projects or certain A-levels or GCSEs because that's what university wants. I'd say go with your passion. And if you are a scientist, but you like to do history or English, why not do that as well? Don't just have to do maths, physics and chemistry because that's what you think that universities need that. So go with what you enjoy. You'll always be successful if you do something that you enjoy, is what I've learned. And secondly, when you first start working, you're probably more performance orientated. You probably think less about the behaviors, about how you interact with people, about team working, that side of things. So that is a big part. Certainly in my role now, I operate in a matrix structure. Nobody works directly for me. So I've got to try and get the best out of people just by working with them. So that part of things is a lot different. So the young me, I'd say, think about that aspect of your career earlier on as opposed to later on, and try and develop those sort of skills earlier than later.
So I was just wondering about whether those kind of early exposure to sales visits that you went out on and were with some of those customer negotiations, has that helped you? Maybe that on the one side and the research methodology on the other. Has any lessons from those times do you find still helpful now for you?
Definitely, I think on things like relationship management, how the guys I go out with generally were probably in their 40s and 50s, and I'd be in my 20s. They'd had a lot of experience on that side of things, so that sort of customer relationship side, very important. And even trying to get a price increase through, how that can be done in a nice way, as opposed to sort of banging your hand on the table and trying to show value in your product as well, and how you are a good supplier.
So you mentioned before that there's, aerospace programs, they can be quite long, quite long projects, quite long programs. Issues come up. Maybe this is too simple a way of looking at it, but what would you say when there are issues? What would you say is usually sitting at the heart, of those issues?
Probably will be a couple of things. It could be a risk that was not known, or a risk that was not considered to need to be mitigated. It could be just a pure error from somebody. It could be something that the customer hasn't thought about, so we've had to reconsider. So it can be from multiple areas where that can stem from. But my last boss, Richard, who worked at Triumph, I'd worked for previous bosses, and we had an issue here in one of the first projects I worked on. And I said, "I'm quite surprised, Richard, that you're not on my case more and getting a little bit more annoyed and pushy." He said, "Mark, that problem will be there no matter how I act with you. If I act with you in that behaviour, the team and yourself are going to get more stressed. We need to stay calm and work together as a team." And that's how I like to work, work with people and try and use the tools when we need them, such as lean tools like A3s and problem solving, and do things in a logical way and try and remain calm with the team and try and support the team. And if a mistake's made, we accept that the mistake's been made, but just not to do it again.
He sounds like a great boss. Yeah, that sounds like a nice way of kind of handling it, because that kind of artificial stress and pressure, it's probably only going to make people perform worse, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does that, working in that communication, what's the difference in aerospace versus maybe some other of the industries that you worked with? When there is that error there, or there's some kind of issue, you have to communicate that to your aerospace customers. What kind of differences have you found there?
I'd say that the reaction time to correct is quicker in automotive because there's less regulation. So also you factor in things such as export compliance. If you've got military products in aerospace, you can't go communicate things out of the UK without the right controls in place. With things like civil aviation and cars, those regulations aren't in place. So you can be, we've got an issue with a part on our car line today. I want you here tomorrow, and you'll be here tomorrow. And basically, we need a solution in the next few weeks. It can be as quick as that. In aerospace, it still could be, I want you here tomorrow, but there's a lot more regulation and qualification would go around many of the parts, particularly things that we make that go on landing gear and open and lock doors, for example. You can't just suddenly change even a simple washer or a bolt because it could fail. So there's a lot more rigor around it. So it can be slower, but for the right reasons.
Yeah, so that must be quite a culture change, kind of shifting into this then.
When I first joined aerospace about 13 years ago, I said, "What's the volume of this part then?" And they went 300. And I said, "Is that a day? Is it a week?" "No, that's a year." And I was like, whoa, that was quite a shock, really.
So how do you adapt to that then? If you're coming from that kind of faster pace, let's make decisions, let's get things done quickly, what kind of things did you have to do to adapt to this kind of slower pace, but as you said, for all the right reasons?
Yeah. I mean, you have to get to grips with it quite quickly, to be honest. You've got to readjust and then realise because of the of export compliance, a lot of the time, you can't just suddenly do things quickly. So it was just, I suppose, retraining myself really to adjust to that way. And again, a lot of the improvement philosophy, such as lean, does apply to aerospace, but it's much easier to put a change and justify a change when you've got 100,000 units a year, as opposed to possibly 300. That if you want to buy a piece of equipment and it costs £10,000 and you can save X on a part by doing something, it's a lot easier to justify it in the car market than it is in the aerospace market. So, and again, the improvements as well, lean improvement, you typically would do a run on a few thousand parts. That could be a year's run in aerospace. So it's it's not quite transferable, but there are some similarities.
So you were mentioning before about the communication, and you kind of work in a matrix where you have to kind of build relationships. You don't have to go into specifics here, but I was just wondering if you remember a moment where maybe an issue was maybe spiraling a bit, maybe some people were panicking a bit, and having that communication helped to get it resolved.
Yes, I mean, in some of the bigger projects, we have things called statements of work, which defines how a project will be run. And also in there, there'll be a communication plan. And that generally is agreed with the customer stakeholders up front. So you will, typically have a report once a week. You might have a call once a week. You might have a team meeting once a week. There are tools to do that, but that's the structure. At the end of the day, it's up to the program or project manager to do that in a way that is a good communication. So although you might just want to email something, or me email you, Martin, and say, thanks a lot, Martin, can I have a project plan off you, please, for this week? Sometimes a face-to-face call or a meeting is much better because it softens things. Things can come across the wrong way. So I do try to, where possible, speak to people, particularly if they're on site here in the UK. We've got a sister site in the UK, and then where possible, where a project will be launching, I try to get out there to do the launch face-to-face as well. You get the buy-in with things, but yeah, communication generally will have a plan, a method of it. It's just how you, as the project program manager, want to deliver that.
So you think that, and you think one of the big things is that kind of face-to-face, or kind of picking up the phone and speaking to someone. You think that makes a big difference there?
Definitely, and I think also when things are launching or things have gone wrong, that's the best time to do that, because you can also find that we've had projects with customers where we've had an issue. And by working with them on a problem, you've got to know more of their team. They've got more trust in you because they know your problem-solving skills, which they wouldn't know previously. So by having that communication and Teams calls and whatever methodology you would do, visiting their site, sharing alternate meetings, or their site, our site, for example, it helps to build that trust and relationship. A lot of people now too easily just send an email and think that's the job done. Well, that isn't the job done. That's part of the job, but that isn't the job.
Yeah, it's about building the relationship and the trust that you mentioned before. Yeah, you don't get trust from sending a couple of bullet points in an email, I guess. So if you're enjoying this episode, please give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That would help us to keep bringing authentic manufacturing conversations with the people who are shaping our industry. Thank you. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and do a section called Myths and Truths. So I'm going to throw some statements out there. Let me know if you think it's a myth or a truth. Most engineering problems get solved faster if everyone replies on the email thread faster.
Myth.
What do you think of that as a whole? When there is an issue going around, a gigantic email thread with everyone CC'd. Is that a good way to handle things, or it's not? Like this kind of leads on to what we were just saying right there, but this is kind of a common thing that happens, isn't it?
I mean, I've also learned from the hard way as well not to do that. But I think to communicate, we've got an issue. So today we can't make the product because we're short of this part. Communicate to all the people involved is good, but then I'd put at the bottom, I'll be holding a meeting with the direct people responsible with this so that we can discuss it as a team as soon as possible. Sometimes when people aren't available, then you might have to do a bit of the ping-ponging with the emails. But the problem is, I might be typing the reply, and then Fred might be typing his reply, and Joe's typing, and suddenly 3 emails come in all on the same subject, but they've all synced incorrectly, and then it's sort of all together again, all over the place. So then I've got to pull it together and try, and it is difficult. And you get some people who don't need to say anything, feel obliged that they have to say something, so they're chucking their bits in as well. So
okay, that's interesting. So you think kind of the email out there to let people who need to know, use that to let them know, but then arrange ideal situation, arrange a meeting for the discussion, do that in person, then if needed, an email afterwards saying, this is what we've decided to do.
Yeah, with a plan. Yeah.
That's nice. Yeah, that's really good. I like that. Second one then. Most delays start with misalignment, not engineering faults.
True. I'd say true.
Okay. How come?
A lot of people, I do like to be, I'm quite a flexible project manager in the fact that if things are going well, I won't apply the tools as harsh as I would be if things are going wrong. But somebody might say, "Oh, the first time yield on that product there, it's terrible." Now, is it terrible today? Is it terrible over the life? There's no data behind it, so sometimes these things are not communicated properly. It might have been engineered perfectly well, but the test rig might have gone out of calibration, and that's why it's terrible for the day. So I think, yes, sometimes you have got engineering problems, engineering latent defects, parts come in incorrect and probably aren't checked correctly. But yeah, I'd say that's not the fundamental reason always. It can be all sorts of reasons, including communication.
If something is urgent, you should push it through quickly.
When I was on a course 25 years ago, I was taught about urgent and important. So, it might be urgent to change the toilet roll, but it might not be totally important. It's not going to stop the factory, for example. So you've got to make an assessment on that, and you might want to do some sort of a risk assessment on, the impact of it happening and probability of it not happening. So some sort of an impact assessment might be the thing to do. But again, that's a culture thing. If someone senior calls you and says, "Get this done now," you might feel pressured. But I think you should, if you don't feel it's an urgent thing to do, you should do that assessment and go back to that person and say, "Well, actually, I've got these 5 things on the go, which you've told me also are urgent. I've done an assessment, and I think this one actually is quite low down because we don't need some more loo roll because we've got a shop on the corner there we can go and get some from. You don't need me to do something now." So that's how I probably would answer that question.
Okay, that's nice. Yeah, I like the urgent and important kind of matrix. And yeah, I've done that in the past when I've got a bit sidetracked. Pressure helps engineers to work faster.
It's quite funny. I'm a member of the Association of Project Managers. Every month we get a publication to read with various articles in, and it was talking about that similar subject in this month's publications. And it was saying that people do not need intense and continuous pressure to work because, as you mentioned earlier, it actually works negatively with people's performance. But people need some pressure to work. So the pressure can be a time scale or the amount of work or that side of things. But I think people, if they're pressurized in the right way from a motivational point of view, you can get a lot out of people. So I think it's and again, individual based. Some people don't take pressure very well. Some people thrive on pressure. My best friend, he's in charge of a county council. He loves pressure, so he thrives on that. But I've met engineers that will break down with just an instant of pressure. So it's just working out what level to apply, and as a program manager, how much to keep back from them as well. I might get pressure from a customer saying, "If this isn't solved in 2 weeks, you've got a big problem." I can't tell that to my team member who doesn't handle that very well. I've got to deliver it in a totally different message to him to protect him from that level of pressure.
Yeah, that's interesting. When we've worked together, I like the way that you will kind of end a question with what's the best timeline you can do, or what timeline, you open it with an open-ended question first. And then, I've seen you at other times, coming back and maybe saying if it's needed, can you do any improvements here or there on it? But in a, kind of in an open kind of way. So yeah, that's interesting. Okay, next one. Program managers need to know every technical detail.
Certainly not. So what I do is I nobody here, or very few people, know that I've got a PhD and a science background. And I don't need to tell people that, that all they need to know is that I've been employed to be a program project manager. Obviously, I need to know a little bit of detail, but I just see a product as a black box. So I think I've got a technical lead on my team, and him and his engineering team know all about hydraulics and electronics. I have a familiarization with this, so I just need to ask sometimes, and I do it in a I pretend I'm naive, but I'll ask questions pretending that I'm a bit dumb, but actually they can be quite intelligent questions, just to make sure that we're doing checks and balances with people, because you can get engineers who like to do research projects. So they can go right down the wrong line or take a long time to do things. So it's a balance. So to answer your question, I'd say you need to know a bit. You should certainly go down and see the current products made and speak to people. But no, it isn't your job to know how to program test software. I wouldn't know where to start. So I don't intend to learn. I've got experts who can do that, and suppliers who can do that.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because I remember some conversations we had, around some of those projects, and we were kind of deep. It may have been deep in the technical details, but you obviously needed, to update the program, let the customer know what was going on, and I thought that must have been quite a challenging way to, at that point, to kind of, see the wood for the trees, if you know what I mean, at that point, and sift out what was relevant from where we were up to. So
Yeah.
But that's part of the skill, I guess, isn't it? That's the key skill. Better tools and systems automatically improve how teams work.
I'd say that they should do, but you've got to get buy-in, and I think the UK generally is pretty poor at training. Generally, I would say training things out. So we've just got this wonderful new tool called Microsoft Excel, and it's going to solve all your problems for doing spreadsheets. Here you go. Well, I've never heard of it before, number one, and number two, I've not been trained on it, so it might solve the problems, but it's how you implement and train things, And again, we have an ERP system here, and in the previous company, use an example, when they implemented it, they made sure that every function had a super user and a training manual, so that when you join the company, when I joined the last company as a program manager, I was trained on that module. They could have just, other companies said, right, here we go, here's the system, get on with it, learn as you go along. But systems are great, but you need to know how to use them.
That's interesting, a couple of things you mentioned there, because I've heard that come up before. So I've got a couple of follow-up questions. One is, you mentioned the UK. You don't think are particularly good at doing training. Why? What makes you say that? And what are you thinking versus another country?
I've got no benchmark with other countries. Just speaking to other people who I've worked with in other countries would have a moan saying I've had no training or whatever. But the UK, yes, we do training, and the companies I've worked in have done training. But for example, I've never worked in a company that's been excellent at training people to be managers, for example. You might be a very good engineer, you might get on well with people, but it doesn't mean you can manage properly, as an example, And often people wouldn't say to me, you're pretty poor at negotiating, Mark, as an example. Part of your job, I think you need to go on a negotiation skills course. I haven't had that conversation, but they're good at saying, here's some courses that you might need to know about, for example, manual handling or diversity. They're great courses to do, and we all need to do them, but some specific courses are not often identified. So my experience working in manufacturing generally has been probably need to identify people's needs a bit better, and at appraisals follow up with what you promised your employee, because when it comes to the next appraisal, they can say, well, I feel a bit let down because you promised me this training last year and I haven't done it, and I can't improve, and I want to get on, I want to further my career, as an example.
Sure. Well, it should make sense, shouldn't it? We want it should benefit, the people and the business by people having that training and being more effective. So, it makes more sense. Okay, thanks a lot for doing that. Let's just move on to the future and now. So what kind of projects are you working on at the moment? And we're coming up to the end of the year. What have you got anything that you're looking forward to working on next year?
So we've got a lot of bid activity ongoing at the moment. So we're hoping to secure some new projects in the near future, projects with existing and possible new customers. So that's quite exciting for us. At the moment, I've got a couple of projects, one that you're working with me on a test bench, and I've got another similar project as well. I quite like those because, again, it's quite a diverse range of product hardware and software. And sometimes, again, working on that last project with you, Martin, sometimes you don't know whether is it the software on the test bench that's wrong? Is it the software that's in the hardware that's wrong? Has the hardware been made incorrectly? It's quite complex how these things are put together. So they're quite interesting projects, to be fair. And also the people I'm working with on those projects, I quite enjoy getting on with as well. So you can't pick your project teams, and you naturally get on with some people, and you don't get on with other people as well. But they're still part of your team. You still got to work them and respect them. But sometimes some people's natures are more like yours, and I quite like to keep things humorous and have a laugh at the appropriate times. So yeah, the teams I'm on at the moment are like that. So
sounds good. So yeah, so you've got a good year coming up. Can you think of any moments where you recently felt, yeah, this is why I enjoy doing this job, and this is why I'm doing this?
Yeah. So for some strange reason, in the last 2 or 3 companies I've worked in, find it very difficult for internal people who want to be a project or program manager. Their perception is, rightly or wrongly, every day you get issues. I mean, of course, things will go wrong because it's not steady state, it's development. But if you work in supply chain, if you work in IT, you get problems. But the perception is program management is problems all the time. And in a lot of companies, you have a lot of responsibility, but very little authority. So, I've got to deliver something on time to a budget, but essentially I've still got to go and ask for that money. I can't just agree that. So there's a lot of responsibility put on that side of things. But we had a young engineer who's just graduated last year, been with us about a year, and he wanted to come and learn about project and program management. So I thought, how can I do this? Be a bit devious. So I thought, what I'll do is I will get him started on some small projects. And thinking back to the conversation about behaviours and knowing people, you need to go down to the other sites and meet these people. Well, why not? Why can't I do it by phone? I said, go down and meet these people on the projects face to face, and then learn a bit more about them, and then come back. We'll start the project. So he did that. I'll get you on a Prince 2, which is a methodology of project managing with a certification. We'll get you that. You'll learn how to do it by the book, and you'll get a certificate at the end of it. So you'll have some sort of a certification to say, well done, you've done this properly. But you're following on projects, you're sitting on calls, and you see how things are done. And on a couple of the meetings, he said, why did you do that? Why did you make that decision, or why did you do that? I said, well, you've got to try and get the opinion of the team, the consensus, but sometimes you've had that experience, you've been in a previous situation. We are the greybeards, and I am getting a bit of a greybeard now, Martin, an old hand in these things, and you've seen it before, and you know what to do because you've made a mistake before, and you've learnt from your mistake, and he sort of got it. And at the end of it all, he said, I now know why you asked me to go and see those people, because it was about getting to know them and networking. I now know why I did the course. That was the purest form of doing it. But in reality, you use that as a framework, but you sort of do it your way. And that's the way that you get things through and try and stay agile and keep the project flowing and doing things from experience. So that was really nice that he did that, spent some time with me, and he really enjoyed the time as a project manager.
Brilliant. Yeah, that sounds really good. A couple of things come up that I'd just like to go into on that then. I think you said you were in the meeting, a problem had come up, or people were telling you their ideas. You'd been there before, and you knew the solution basically. What's the best way to handle that? Do you just kind of override things and say, yeah, I've been here before, this is how you do it? Or do you try and bring people around so that they're coming to your way of thinking?
Yeah, I think from memory, it wasn't a big revelation in project management. It was the fact that I think we may have had some parts that were not conforming, but we could buy some more parts quickly. They were in stock at the suppliers. So we were retesting the current parts. They may have passed, but the risk was that testing could take 2 to 4 weeks. If they failed, the schedule would have been blown. I think for £1,000, we could buy some new ones that were tested from a different batch. So I just proposed to the team, let's do that, and then someone will say to me, that's £1,000, Mark. Isn't a lot of money, but it's still £1,000. Could have been £10,000. It could have been $1 million, depending on the size of the project. But it was like, let's do that, mitigate the risk. And if it works, these parts of it here, we can start fresh. We can basically get rid of all that lead time. So you could be wasting money, but also you've got to think about the pros and cons of protecting the schedule. So it was getting a balance there of the right thing to do, really. So I convinced the buyer to spend £1,000, and he was like saying, well, why would you want to waste £1,000? And I explained the rationale to him, and then he understood, or the team understood.
Yeah. So, it seemed like a bit of a no-brainer. All right. And the second thing I was wondering was, you've kind of mentioned a lot that the face-to-face communication is really helpful. And I'm just wondering what you've found with kind of younger engineers kind of coming through. I know with my kids, they're like very much into the texting and the messaging to communicate, and probably less comfortable at picking up the phone and speaking to someone versus sending a quick message. So, I'm just wondering how you see that kind of going or changing things in the future, or do you think like an essential thing is to teach the younger engineers coming up to break that kind of messaging habit?
I'd say from a very general opinion of what I've seen is that young people coming through tend to be a little bit more risk averse than my generation. My previous boss, who used to work with automotive, I think cavalier would be a bit of a strong word, but because he'd seen so much, he would just make a decision, which 9 times out of 10 was correct, but sometimes he'd make a horrendous decision. So we are seeing a shift, and on that particular project where I was doing some mentoring, as I mentioned, I kept asking about something, and it was like, I've emailed them, and I'm like, have you phoned them? Well, no. Why haven't you phoned them? Well, I haven't got access to a desk phone or whatever the problem was, I said, well, have you asked if you can use mine? Do you want to borrow my mobile? It was almost like it was an excuse not to do that, but once they'd spoken to that person, the problem was solved, because that person realised he had 100 emails in his box and didn't know which one to choose. But once you spoke to him, he thought, actually, this is important. So
it goes top of the list in priority, doesn't it? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you think they just need a bit of a gentle push, basically, to pick up that phone or get in front of that person and ask the question?
Yeah, I'd definitely say so. I mean, it's not everybody, and I've been very generalistic in terms of this, but yeah, I've got my own kids, and they do a lot of social media stuff, and it has its pros, but it has its cons as well. So you've got to think back to Victorian times, the Roman times. They still built roads, they still invented things. They didn't have telephones, they didn't have computers. It was done that way, so it must have worked.
Thanks a lot for your time. This has been a really interesting chat. Great to find out a bit more about your background and what you're doing. Just wondering if you have a final takeaway that we can leave. What one small habit you think a team could start this week just to prevent problems from snowballing?
I think just be open and honest. If you can get that trust within the team and the company, and that often comes to culture. The culture's not always there in companies. It's just to be open and honest about things and share problems, and don't be scared to ask for help, and don't be scared to admit a weakness. If you don't know the answer, it doesn't mean that you're a fool. It just doesn't mean you haven't got the answer or you don't know how to get the answer. So I think just try and be open and honest. And I've been in projects before where people have tried to cover things up, and yeah, it might sound like a good idea at the time, but you normally get found out. It's always best to be open and honest, and then things get flushed out and solved quickly. So it's that communication and transparency, I would say, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Sounds great. Thanks a lot for the chat today. Thanks a lot for the advice, the thoughts, your expertise. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this chat. Thanks, Mark.
Me too, Martin. Thank you.